So good day viewers, welcome to another biology presentation. This is your presenter, Mr. Mlenga. So in this presentation, we are going to look at genetics, and this is our lesson 2. So if you have not watched the first lesson under genetics, make sure you go and watch. So we are looking at the subtopic, variation and animal species. Specific outcomes: describe variation in humans, observe variations in flowering plants, distinguish between continuous and discontinuous variation, describe the factors that cause variations among plants and animals of the same species. So variation is defined as the difference between phenotypes, or we can say variation refers to the observable differences within species. So any difference that we are able to observe that exists within species, that is referred as variation. So variation in humans can be expressed in terms of eye color, skin color, fingerprints, the ability to roll the tongue, and the height. So both animals and plants have unique traits that will differentiate one individual from the other. So this is what variation is all about. So let us now try to look at some of these expression of variations in humans. So we are going to start with eye color. So when you look at eye color, variation in eye color can vary from light brown to black. Okay, and this is dependent upon the amount of melanin that is in the iris. So blue eyes, they lack melanin. Melanin is just a color pigment. Okay, then brown eyes, they are dominant over blue eyes. Okay, so let us now look at the variation under skin color. So the skin color variations, they are determined by the production of melanin in the skin. So the phenotypes for skin color, they are controlled by 2 genes, and they are represented by 9 different genotypes. So we can see that you've got people who have got dark skin, others have got light skin, others have got the skin that is that looks yellowish, and so on and so forth. So this is dependent upon maybe the places where such people are living. Like when you look at people living in Africa, they are closer to the sun shines, or the sun is too strong, so it hits on their skin, which affects melanin. Okay, so now let us look at other expression. We look at fingerprints. So under fingerprint, you find that this is a mark that is made that shows a pattern of ridges. Okay, that is on the pads of the fingers. So each individual has its own unique fingerprint, and this can be used to distinguish one person from the other. And it can also be used to identify what? To identify people. This is why when you go to the police, they will get the fingerprints, or they will put them in the system, such that if you make an offense again, they will call you back and they will run the fingerprints, and they will be able to identify that person. Okay, so let us now move on to another expression of variation in humans, which is the ability to roll the tongue. So when you look at the ability to roll the tongue there, it's not everybody who's able to roll the tongue. Okay, others, they can't do it. So this tells us that to be able to roll one's tongue, it is an inherited trait. Some people can roll their tongues in a tube, others, they can't roll their tongues. So it's not something that can be done by everyone. Others can't do it. So we now move on, we look at height. So variation expression in humans, height. So height is controlled by multiple genes. Okay, so you find that about 80% of the humans' height, this can be contributed to the genes they inherit. Then the other 20% is due to the environmental factors. Okay, mainly when you look at nutrition, you find that maybe their eating habit is bad, and this will contribute to the growth of such individuals. So I hope we have gotten what I've explained. So we now look at variations in flowering plants. So variation in flowering plants can be expressed as different fruit structures and scent, height, leaf size, and the shape and mass of the what? Of the plant. So this means that we have plants that have got different fruit structure. Others they have got different scent. Others they are tall. Some other plants are short. Okay, so in terms of their leaf sizes also it differs, and their shape, also the mass of the what? Of the plant. That is how we can explain variation in flowering plants. So having looked at variation in flowering plants, let us now look at the types of variation. So we have two types of variation. We have what we call continuous variation, and we have what we call discontinuous variation. So upon knowing these two types of variation, you must know what each of the type of variation explains. So we are going to start with continuous variation. So continuous variation is the type of variation where a characteristic has many intermediate forms between two extremes. Examples of characteristics that show continuous variation in humans, we have height. Okay, it's an example of continuous variation. Skin color or complexion is also an example of continuous variation. We have body size, or we can say weight, is also an example of continuous variation. We also have hand span, which is also an example of continuous variation. We also have foot length or foot to size. So you have to make sure that you know what continuous variation is, and you are able to state the examples of continuous variation. So let us now look at the causes of continuous variation. So some of the causes of continuous variation is that variation is controlled by many genes, meaning that in continuous variation, many genes control it. Okay, it is controlled by many genes. This is one of the causes of continuous variation. Okay, so I hope it's clear. You have gotten what I've said there. Now let us look at the graph that illustrates a continuous variation. So here you find that when the number of individuals is plotted against a characteristic that shows continuous variation, a normal distribution curve, that is a bell-shaped curve like this one, you can see we have this bell-shaped. Okay, so the bell-shaped curve is produced as it is illustrated in this graph. So this graph is showing continuous variation. So you have to make sure that you are able to identify this graph, what type of variation is it showing. So here we have in the x-axis, we have the number of individuals, and in the x-axis, sorry, down here, we have height, and in the y-axis, we have number of individuals. So this is an example of a graph that illustrates continuous variation. So having looked at continuous variation, let us now look at discontinuous variation. So discontinuous variation is the type of variation where a characteristic has clear-cut different groups. So these clear-cut different groups, they are distinct groups with no intermediate forms. So what are some of the examples of discontinuous variation? We have sex, we have blood groups, we also have color of what? The eyes. And then other examples of discontinuous variation, we have tongue rolling, the ability to roll the tongue. And some of the causes of discontinuous variation, we have number one, it is caused by few genes. Okay, so this is one of the genetic cause. Okay, you can say it is caused by few genes. So you have to be careful. In an exam, they can ask you the causes of both continuous variation and continuous variation in terms of genetic. Okay, so you can say continuous variation is controlled by many genes, while discontinuous variation is controlled by few genes. So let us now look at the graph that illustrates discontinuous variation. So this is the graph that shows discontinuous variation. So we are saying the characteristics which show this kind of variation, they are normally plotted on histograms, or the bar charts or similar types of graph as shown in this diagram, which is alongside. So here in the y-axis right here, we have the percentage of population, and in the x-axis, we have the blood type. Remember, so this blood type, for example, blood type AB is showing the number of population that has it. Blood group A is also illustrating the number of populations that has this blood type, showing the percentage. Then blood group O showing the percentage as well. So make sure that you are able to distinguish the graphs that is showing continuous variation, and you are also able to distinguish the graph that is showing discontinuous variation. So we now come to look at the factors that causes variations among plants and animals of the same species. So some of the factors that causes variation among plants and the animals of the same species, number one, we have environmental factors. So these environmental factors can affect the phenotype, meaning that they can affect the outward appearance of an organism. For example, diet, which is nutrition. So if you remember, under height, we said this one is normally affected by the environmental factor such as the nutrition. If the person is taking in a poor diet, it will such person, their growth will be affected. Apart from that, we can also have soil. Then, apart from the environmental factors, we also have climate factors such as the temperature and the altitude. So under the temperature, if you remember concerning the skin color, I did mention that we have individuals that live in Africa, for example. These people live in Africa. The sun is too strong, which hits on their skin and affects melanin, which gives color to the skin. So these are some of the factors that can cause variation among plants and the animals of the same species. So I hope that you have gotten something. Okay, if at all you have any question, you are free to leave a comment in the comment section and I will be able to respond to you. So let us now look at other factors. We have plants in fertile soil, they grow faster than plants that are in poor soil. Then people who live at high altitudes where there is less oxygen in the air, they have greater lung volumes and they produce more hemoglobin in their blood. Okay, this is because it makes the best use of the available oxygen that is in the air. And the type of soil influences the plant growth and the color of the flowers. So the plants that are in acidic soil, they tend to grow more and pinky flowers. So I hope that you have gotten something. We have now come to the end of our biology presentation. So thank you so much everybody for watching. This has been your presenter, Mr. Mlenga. Bye bye.